My name is John Dodson. I'm an urban farmer in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm for the soil because without healthy soil, there's no healthy food. With no healthy food, there's no healthy life.
Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and joining us today, co-host Dr. Eric Bendfeldt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. And guys, I'm really excited today to be talking with a farmer in South Central Virginia, I believe in Franklin County. He is very involved in a lot of things regarding field crops and soil health. And Mary, if you would do the introduction, please.
Absolutely. Honored to have Daniel Austin with us, who is a fifth generation farmer living in Franklin County, Virginia, and operates Sprig Ag, and it produces forage seed, animal feed, grain for human consumption, much more. Extremely innovative farmer, and is also involved in multiple organizations across the state, across the country, and is also mentoring farmers around the state. So really excited to hear more from you, Daniel, about what you're doing on your operation, and what makes you tick when it comes to soil health. So to start, would love to just hear a little bit of a background. We know fifth generation, but just how did you end up on the land that you're farming today?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me on. Mary, that's quite a journey here, so I'll try to give a little bit of background. My father is a dairy farmer. He still milks cows next door to where I'm at, and he told me that there was always room for me on the family farm if I wanted to milk cows. And I really like cows. I like them best with either cheese or potatoes. And if I never have to milk another cow again, that'll be great with me. So we started our journey to try to decide and figure out if we could make a living producing grain in Southwest Virginia in around 2012. As far as soil health, it's kind of embarrassing to admit this, but my journey with soil health started because I extremely dislike picking up rocks. When we were younger at home and growing up, we used to have alfalfa in the rotation to feed the dairy cattle, and we would spring plant alfalfa in February, and we would do that by working the land down, fitting it up with a disc harrow, and then we'd seed the alfalfa with like a brilliant seeder or even a drill. And then we would spend the entire month of February picking up rocks. And, in my mind at that point, I was like, if we could just come up with a way to leave them under the surface of the soil. So not very inspirational, but I started my journey to soil health because I'm lazy and I don't like picking up rocks.
Daniel, tell us about your business with milling grains, and also, I believe you're in I guess you would call it the seed business. You distribute cover crop seeds and forage crops. Tell us about that aspect.
Absolutely, Jeff. So someone challenged me about a year ago to describe what we do in one sentence. So after a lot of soul searching and head scratching, we came up with a one sentence definition of what we do. So what we do is we grow, process, and package local grain for direct to consumer consumption. That's basically what we do. I'll break that down a little bit further. If you can envision our business as a pyramid that would look like the food nutrition pyramid, the very top layer is food grains. At this point, I would consider it kind of a weird hobby, but so we would grow grains for direct human consumption. So we grow things like hard wheat and spelt, buckwheat, open-pollinated corn. And then from there, we sell those grains in a fairly varied marketplace. So you can buy, say, a 20-pound bag of clean wheat berries. That would go to serious home bakers that have their own mill, even some some bakers throughout the state that would use our grains to bake with, some mills that are sourcing local grains. So that's where one place would go. We ship some wheat and corn both to a mill in Holmes County, Ohio, and they actually have a system they call puffing grain. And so they take our wheat and they puff it, and they add honey and coconut oil to it and send it back to us, and we package it as a breakfast cereal. Then the next level under that is we operate a non-GMO feed mill, and that's where the non-GMO corn and non-GMO soybeans come in. We have a gentleman out of Chatham that comes in and roasts the soy on site for us. And then we work with a Petrel company, mostly out of Bainbridge, Pennsylvania, to formulate rations. And then we make a variety of bag feed, and that would mostly go to the homestead market that folks come here on the farm and purchase. We have an honor system store that they buy out of. Then the next level down of the pyramid is that we have a flock of sheep that's increasing. We're at about 350 head currently. We're really interested in how we can combine that with our cover cropping to basically see if we can hit kind of another lick, if you will, on every acre.
Daniel, thank you for that description of really stacked enterprises. Maybe to take a step back, if you could tell people a little bit more about Franklin County. I think you often speak about resource concerns and, I think being part of the Blue Ridge Mountains or the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Can you describe the landscape there?
Sure, absolutely. I'm just over the hill on the east side of Ferrum College. If you look on a map, my address is Rocky Mount, but I'm actually basically in the middle between Rocky Mount, Callaway, and Ferrum. From the top of my driveway, I can see the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's about 8 miles as the crow flies. So we're right on the eastern edge of the Blue Ridge. My average field size is about 8 acres, and we're very, very rolling land. So for me, my number one resource concern is always erosion. So again, growing up, we grew corn silage for the dairy herd. And I got to noticing that we would chop corn silage, and then we would come in later after the corn silage was chopped, and we would plant in a cover crop to try to help hold the soil. And I would notice, I remember it distinctly, the very spot in the field that I noticed this in, that it looked like someone had spread gravel on the field. And so I asked my father if for some reason we had put gravel there, or maybe we had spread some pen pack manure and scraped some gravel in accidentally. And well, no, that field hadn't had anything applied at all. And so I got off the tractor and got down and looked, and what had actually happened is that all of the top maybe 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of soil had completely eroded away. And I couldn't even tell it until I tried to figure out why that there was gravel spread in the field. My number one concern is always erosion, and not just the big gullies or coming off of worked land, but more what I'm going to call the silent killer that we can't see, that's just constantly working. That's the basis of where we start with our resource concern.
Daniel, I know you grow a lot of what folks traditionally would consider cover crops, but I believe I heard you say one time that you don't always consider them cover crops. Often they are still cash crops, and you really see them playing a role on the farm. Wondering if you could explain that a little bit.
So we all stand, or at least I should back up. Maybe I should say, for me, I stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And so we all, in our walk of our careers and our life, we stand and are built off of those kind of before us. And so I'm sure everyone has heard of Gabe Brown and his publication, Dirt to Soil. I was very privileged to hear Mr. Brown speak several years ago, and everyone takes away something different perhaps. But the one thing that I took away from Mr. Brown was that, and he never said this was just my takeaway, was that there's nothing on his farm that he doesn't sell. And so I don't want to come across personally as someone that's, extremely greedy or very money hungry, but agriculture is a tough business, especially, when we branch out kind of with, and sort of start from scratch. So our goal here is that how can we grow crops and keep the soil covered year round? How can we monetize them while improving the soil? And not only that, how can we bring more people back onto our farms? Because I believe that there's a direct correlation to the more people that's involved in our landscape and the health and the ability of our communities to regenerate and thrive.
We're talking today with Daniel Austin of Sprig Ag in Franklin County, Virginia. And Daniel, I wanted to have you participate in a little mental exercise, if you will, with me. You said something earlier that really got my attention. You said that you tailor cover crops for a specific purpose. And I'd like to kind of give you a fictitious scenario, and then you can pop in with questions if you want, but I'd like for you to tailor a cover crop for my fictitious farm. I farm, and this is all made up in my head. I farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, operate a dairy farm, and we grow corn and soybeans in rotation. The corn is strictly corn for silage, about 50 acres of each, and then we also have about 40 acres that we keep for making hay. But I'm looking to grow cover crops for my, specifically for the corn and soybean, the row crops. And we do soil test every other year through Virginia Cooperative Extension. My goal is to add organic matter to the soil and protect these fields from erosion. So in general, knowing what you know with what I've said, how would you tailor a cover crop for my farm?
Sure, Jeff. So we would start by asking you back again, the number one resource concern is erosion. And then we would ask,
we have some erosion problems. If you're aware of the Shenandoah Valley, we have some hilly land, and our farm is definitely on hilly land.
Sure. Then we would ask what your planting equipment is like. So will any of this be harvested for forage? Will all of this be let go to build a lot of biomass? When is the corn come off, and when do the beans come off?
Okay, those are good questions. We follow the general rules here as far as timing of harvest, late August for corn for silage. The beans are coming off in late October, early November, and we rotate those, like I said.
Okay, and is any of this cover crop harvested for forage?
No.
Then from that point, after going through this, then the next, at this point of the exercise, the next thing that I would ask the producer is that, does it need to be kept simple, or can it become fairly diverse? And that can mean a lot of different things. So do we want to drill down to tailoring for specific fields? Can we tailor between the corn and the soy? Do we want to address further resource concerns than only erosion? For instance, would we like to grow some nitrogen in front of the corn? Are we interested in perhaps doing some weed suppression in front of the soybeans?
I'm interested in anything that would prevent soil erosion on my farm.
And then at that point, we would attempt to make a recommendation based around the goals. And at this point, for what you're saying on your operation, we would recommend cereal rye.
Cereal rye, okay, and explain why.
The reason that we would recommend cereal rye is because that in our experience, it's going to be the absolute best for preventing and holding erosion. The reason that we feel like it's the absolute best is its ability to develop a lot of biomass very quickly.
Well, very good. Thank you for the participating in that little exercise. Like I said, it was all made up, but you asked some very interesting questions, and I hope that causes our listeners to think about it.
And Daniel, going from the cereal rye, I know there's different producers that will use or cover crop cocktails. How would you work with somebody who's, maybe reluctant or has questions of going from one crop like cereal rye to maybe a multi-crop mixture of cover crops?
So if someone's wanting to go from, they're asking more questions, in our previous example, we only had one resource concern, was simply we need to prevent erosion. But as we move into where we have a list of resource concerns, which would generally be the truth as we ask more and more questions. So maybe in front of this corn silage crop, maybe we have a resource concern of erosion. But then the number two thing is maybe we would like to grow the corn a little bit cheaper, and we'd like to include some nitrogen. And then maybe the number three concern is we want to be sure that we don't have a nitrogen immobilization from like a really high rye cover crop with a lot of carbon and very low nitrogen. And then maybe the fourth resource concern is compaction. Then we start to design a mix, and that's where our diverse mixes come in versus just a single species. Of course, that comes with a little bit more management. So we try to spend a lot of time talking with producers when we're working with cover crop mixes on the management that's going to come in. For instance, when are we going to terminate the cover crop, and how are we going to terminate it? Is there any possibility that anything in the cover crop could perhaps become a weed later on? An instance of that would be that we generally would never recommend any kind of annual ryegrass on an operation that's growing a small grain.
And Daniel, we only have about a minute or so left in this episode, but wondering what a few of your favorite resources are. I know you are a resource to many, but where you look, do you listen to any podcasts, or what some of your favorite books are on soil health and farming?
So I have a sort of a different method perhaps than many do. So what I personally do is read as much as I can about, the No-Till Farming magazine, a lot of popular press, books that are written by folks like Gabe Brown, David Montgomery, those kind of authors. But then I try to cross-reference those to anything published before 1950. And, one of my favorite books is a book called The Farming Ladder by a gentleman named George Henderson. It was published in 1942. And then I like to read a lot of the old university publications that were printed, again, before the 50s. And what I try to do is cross-reference the new and the old. And when they match up, we generally jump in with both feet.
Very interesting. Unfortunately, our time is up in this episode. I hope that you'll have time to join us again for a second episode. Very interesting conversation today with Daniel Austin of Sprig Ag in Franklin County, Virginia. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mary and Eric, we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you have a specific question about soil health, call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a soil and water conservation district office. Music used during today's program is provided courtesy of Mr. Smith. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.